Hello.
Hello.
How y'all doing?
Not too bad.
Good.
Good, good. Do the usual shuffle between virtual meeting rooms and let some people have a couple minutes, but let's get the docs at least pulled up, right? They're like different versions of Zoom. Some modern Zooms now let you like pin a message, so you don't have to resend it every time people join. That is not this Zoom. It's weird how Zoom can have different versions.
Yeah, it's
Like
almost like the
it's
meeting version is
yeah.
dependent on who started it or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I end up pasting in so frequently. Steve knows, like people drift in and I'm like, all right, I
Yeah,
gotta
yeah.
paste again.
Exactly. Exactly.
I guess it picks the feature toggles of the person who set it up.
It
Yeah.
it is, right? Yeah. And like whether or not they even had those access to those feature toggles when they set it up, right? So this is a very old room. So like I'm sure that wasn't even an option, right? So it's probably default to off or whatever, right?
Hmm.
So uh
Yeah, there's like a ton of things you can adjust and tweak and twist. And yes,
exactly.
if it doesn't upgrade, then it's all
That's the thing about, I mean, it's true for platforms as well, right? That's the thing about all software. Like either like it always starts like just do this one thing and do it really well, and then everyone wants something customized on it. Then it becomes the behemoth. So it's like either
are we moving?
you're destined to stay small and specialized and really easy to use, or you're aim for like total world domination, and then you become Salesforce, Jira, Zoom, what pick your very successful software.
Kubernetes.
Poison, Kubernetes, exactly.
Oh, and now we just have video conference decay.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So I always try and give some space for people to join, but then also want to give respect to people who are on time, because otherwise we end up getting everyone coming late all the time. And so we can kick off and people will join us. Hey, William. So I think y'all are all old hat at this point, but just as a reminder, this is not an official meeting or anything. I am here as just a participant and to sort of help make sure that we are unblocked and moving forward. But unlike the normal working group meetings where the leads are more often hosts, that's not my role today. So I believe if I'm tracking this piece of work correctly, that the next step is that so we've been where we understand who we're trying to target, what we're trying to achieve with this piece of work. It's very based on trying to get people to self-assess is a key part of this, and that it's self in this both in the sense of not needing guidance, but also in the sense of it being the people on the platform team. So like that's who we're sort of talking about, or maybe leaders of that team, but like within there, not like CTOs and people looking down and in. It's people who are on the team. And that we want to be consumable. So it's about that speaks to the language we want to use. It speaks to the length of it. It speaks to those kinds of things. And we want it to be welcoming. So this isn't like a judgment call. We don't want people to read it and go, oh, I don't want to answer these questions because I'm going to sound bad. Those kinds of things, which is true of our maturity model as well. So those are some highlights, but there's the more details in the doc if people want to review back. And so where we're at is that the initial pilot questions that were proposed by Corbin and used really effectively by Corbin in a consulting format were very true-false based. And what we realized is that in the goals of this working group's publication, we needed to move to something more multiple choice to be a bit easier to get some more meat out of the answers and tie it back to the maturity model was the theory there. But we didn't have anything to go on. So Corbin has done a great job of getting us some example questions in. And so if you go to the link that I put in, I think we've had some more people join in the chat. You can see examples of the true false questions which have been proven valuable in this setting, in a relevant but not exactly the same setting, and has some great conversation on them. But if you scroll down towards the bottom, you can see we had some conversation around like multiple choice versus Likert, and actually I moved this all to like another document actually, but I will just cross this out. Basically, it was very clear
Abby,
feedback. Yeah,
sorry. Do you want to share a
share screen.
screen while you go through this? We are looking at the document, but maybe we're not in
Maybe
line
look
with
in
you.
different places. Yeah, let's do that. It's a good shout. There we go.
And do you want to record, Abby?
We are already recording. Someone's
We are
already gonna have to
recording.
listen
Okay,
to me
cool.
drone on Zoom once I get the download onto YouTube.
It's good.
That is on my priority list, by the way, for people who are like, well, they won't see this until it's already on YouTube, but that are looking for it. I need to get permissions to get access to the downloads. Once I do, they'll all come up. So we'll have 4 or 5 meetings that'll get posted. But what I was saying is that on this, we've got the true false questions with lots of comments with really interesting perspectives. Below, we had the sort of example of different types of multiple choice questions we could do, and there was a pretty strong opinion that Likert wasn't the right fit for this piece of work, and so we're looking at multiple choice. And then you'll see Corbin's done a great job of getting us a starter for 10 on some multiple choice questions, in particular, I think focused around investment. Actually don't know if that was me writing that, so I'm not sure if that's what he did or not. But yeah, some multiple choice questions so we can get a deeper look at, is this the right format, are these the right words, etc. So is that so that's our target for today. So look at these questions, identify if these are taking us in the right direction, and if they are, figure out where to go next. Does anyone expect something different from this call or want to add anything else to the agenda before we get too deep in the weeds on these questions? Cool. Then who wants to kick us off? Has anyone given this a read? What do people think?
I think
My
probably
first-
Oh, go on.
Yeah, no, you go first.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the benefits of moving to multiple choice should be that we end up with slightly fewer questions where we see an opportunity to merge them into one. And I'm just trying to compare question numbers just for those categories. And I don't know if we've achieved that. Let me just quickly scroll down. I think it's a little lighter. So yeah, it does reduce it a bit. So that's one of the good things about multiple choice is that you should be able to hopefully ask fewer questions, which makes it a bit easier to finish the actual assessment. So yeah, we've kind of on the investment side, we've kind of reduced by 2. There might be opportunities to compress it even further if we get creative, but we can deal with that at a later stage.
Yeah, I think I'd like to spend the time, if we have as an equal number of questions or even 8 or whatever we have right now, is allocate at least a couple of those to basically like gut checking. So like, okay, so like phrasing in a different way the questions, and I think they call that like it's not level setting questions, but whatever. There's like a word for basically saying, can we do a confirmation that we have consistency in the answers? Because otherwise we might have to say, oh, that's uncertain as a response because of that. So yeah, good shout.
May I say? I don't know if this was already discussed, but is there the possibility to put an open field at any after multiple choices? Because what if I don't fit in any of those multiple choices? I know that we are trying to harmonize the answers, but I always have the feeling that the multiple choices offer a baseline, and we all know that sometimes, very often times, we don't fit a situation in the baseline.
I think it's a super interesting question because it sort of speaks to what are our intentions. So in the sense that like if our intentions are to like host this somewhere as a survey and get the responses and therefore be able to provide like an industry feedback loop about this, like, oh, we've had 100 responses, we had 1,000 responses, this is what the information is, then that would be necessary or useful. If that is not in our intention, then like a statement of this has been generated by a working group who is always looking to refresh and keep this accurate and up to date. If you feel like these questions did not fit your use case, please reach out, would be enough, right? Because they'd be doing it on their own, and you'd be saying like, come back to us, and if you want to get involved, kind of thing. So very interesting.
Yeah, I the only thing is, Abby, I don't know. That come back to us or join us to bring in more input. It's good. It's obviously how we operate generally. How much comeback is gonna happen though? Is it going to be a deterrent for some, or is it going to be a stimulus for others? I don't know. I like when I can provide additional feedback, or when I have multiple choices in front of me. I like very much when I can provide additional input or provide a reason why my use case or my particular situation does not fit the realm of the possibility in front of me.
Yeah, and so what I'm going to take down as a note is we do have a running note stock, don't we? Running. There it is. Yeah. There we go. It's like I've set this up for
Well, there you
stuff.
go. Your previous you was very smart.
Yeah, previous me. Not me today, but previous me. I'm just gonna worry about notes and come back to the like things. Is that like, do we want this to be a hosted survey? Survey. If so, we can like capture other for certain questions. If not, how do we encourage feedback for non conformant answers? Right. So that's like, to me, that's like a foundational question we have to answer around hosting it, which like we can come to, in my opinion, a bit later in the process, because we have to get to the point of having what we think are reasonable multiple choice questions, and then we can always throw on at the end like other onto some or all of those if we choose to host it and if we think that's a feedback loop that we can leverage. But yeah, so it's a great point. Yeah.
All right, I'm good with that.
Sorry, Steve. Talking right over you there. What's Oh, and sorry, David, you were first. Sorry, you got covered by Zoom
fortunately I
stuff
was
over there.
muted, so I didn't actually talk over William. So question about
Which
the
I would like anyway, if you talked over me.
Are we looking, I mentioned a rubric before. Are we looking for people to do this self-assessment and then understand which level they are at in each category?
I think so.
Okay.
What
So
do other people think? Like, how do people expect us to use this? Like,
Yeah, the goal. So this section is just the part that helps them understand where they are now, and it should be something that they can do as like a self-assessment. Um, so they kind of fill it in, and then it kind of highlights where they are on that model that we've already got. There are probably then an option for them to take a second set of questions where they can then zero in to get suggestions on what they could do next. And again, that's the idea is that they could self-serve that. Although, like, if they're working with a consultant, the consultant can guide them through that process more and give them more tailored advice. That's how I'd see it.
Or the next, maybe there's another, because a lot of progression stuff is kind of understood in the enterprise, the business, whatever, like in our group of people, right? People presenting at Platform Day. So maybe there's another like paths type document, or even a V2 of the actual maturity model. Like, okay, how do you, what are the steps you take? Because it's fairly clear how to assess where you are, but making change and actually moving from level, like how do I get from level 1 to level 2, especially on a particular one? Funding, like a lot of that comes down to there is a lot of variability in terms of context, but at the same time, you can point to here's how you make change. Like the most basic thing is here's how you make change happen in an organization. Here's different examples. Again, it's like example based. Here are examples of how people have accomplished this in other organizations, that sort of thing. Given that, so answer is yes, we want people to have the outcome of knowing where they are. It looks to me like some of the questions are on the mark in terms of like what maps into what is the very first one? The example one is for investment, I think. And if that really should guide what we're doing, and if we should actually do a run through, like let's look at the questions, but maybe we should model the actual experience of filling it out and kind of put beginner, beginner rather than expert hat on and see, well, if I fill this out, is it going to be kind of obvious, like what I've accomplished? And then mold our questions around that. So I guess what I'm saying is look less at the individual questions right now. Actually look at the format of the self-assessment, which is more than just a survey. It's a survey with a key and an answer, right?
key and an answer. Yeah, I think. Yeah, very interesting. William or Stefan, are you two in response directly to that? I just prioritize if there's something in direct response versus a separate thread, because I think David was proposing we try something, and so I just want to like see if that's worth us like walking down.
I got slightly distracted, David and Abby. I'm sorry about that. I raised my hand to discuss the potential uses of of this assessment tool. So if that is not what David was mentioning, I'll just pause and wait for my turn again.
I think that would fit somewhat well
It
in the
would,
sense that
yeah.
David was saying if we put on the glasses or the hat of the potential users, can we do a bit of a walkthrough of it? So I think that would be a good first confirmation that we're on the same page of who the users are. How about you? So probably would be my answer to that, William, but we'll do that next. But
all right.
Stefan, is there anything that you want to add before we try going down that route a little bit?
It's sort of in the same category because, like, yes, I'm working as a consultancy where we want to talk about platform engineering and want more engagement with our customers. Like, we would probably take this and expand it into like 40 questions per category when we sit with the actual customers instead. Like, this could be their quick, nice view to see where it was, and we would just like explode it into figure out like where do we need to address everything. And I think for our customers, it would be nice to see this and sort of like, where the hell am I? Like, can we have a ubiquitous language of like which levels are we at? That would probably be a good start for them to get this, and then maybe repeat it later on.
Yeah, I think when people are in an appetite to work through a lot of questions, like when they're working with a consultant, there's like a different appetite than I think who we're targeting. So
Exactly.
that's getting into sort of the like uh so like we want to sort of confirm. So the goal for I see Corbin just popped in and things. The goal that was, or the suggestion that David made, was that we could walk through our questions, putting on a bit of the hat or the glasses of the users to be like, is this going to fit with sort of what people are thinking about themselves, thinking about platform engineering, able to answer, understand the vocabulary, etc. So a quick detour, very quick detour. Maybe William, you can take this, of like confirmation that we're all on the same page of who we think our users are, and then that way we are putting a shared hat on. Because we've talked about the users being end users, not the consultancies, even though we believe consultancies will pick this up and do, to your point, what they feel like is viable for them on top of it. So yeah. So William, what were you thinking about for users then?
Well, for users, stakeholders, consumers, who are they going to do something with it? Many hats, of course. But what I'm thinking is that definitely the users, we should cater for the end users slash users. We should also cater for the consultants, of course, because definitely they will be using it. But we should also cater for ourselves. And what I mean by that is we could make this assessment something that can be anonymized and can be sent also to the working group so that we can understand what are trends that we need to um, review, what are things that we need to maybe improve or do less of. I'm just trying to understand. I wouldn't want. I mean, it's okay to develop something and put it out there, but it's also interesting to get some input into the work of the working group and understand if there are aspects that we are not dealing with on a day to day that the platform teams, customers, or customers, sorry, users and developer teams are struggling with maybe some aspects, and we might see recurring trends. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
So
basically, are we asking the right questions in a way,
Correct.
right? And are
Correct.
we actually, are our levels well defined well enough for people to feel that they, because ultimately, right, it's all focused on business outcomes. And if people check all the boxes, but they're still not getting where they think they should be as a business, then have we helped them? Right?
Correct. So we do want platforms to be built and fine tuned constantly, right, David? I mean, it's not something you build, you hand over and you forget about it. So should be our efforts into
Like dog fooding? You want us to do some dog fooding?
yeah, that's what I want to say. I was trying to find the term. Yes, indeed.
and I know Corbin's done that a bit with those original true false questions, and that's part of like the root of a lot of these, which is awesome.
Oh yeah.
I guess maybe like just keeping an eye a little bit on time and moving, getting outcomes of like reviewing those questions done, like during this async call, taking, or the synchronous call, taking advantage of that. This was the audience description that we sort of went over a couple calls ago. That if we give that a quick read, like it feel like, does that feel like what, does everyone aligned? There anything that has changed since we last talked about that? Can we put those hats on of like the engineers, the day-to-day implementers who are our target audience of like doing this, and then go through those questions and see how that works? Make some edits as needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in line. The only thing that I would say is it misses us.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't think we matter.
No,
But that's
that's
probably a bias. Like, so call me out on that if anyone else thinks we matter. I'm just, dot the
No,
universe. But
that is what my children say to me. But
yeah,
so it must be true.
nothing
we
like
not
kids to
generally-
hear the truth.
Do we not generally fit into those categories anyway? As a
I
second
think
No,
that's
group?
what I mean. The hat we wear in the working group, in
Yeah.
my opinion, doesn't matter. It's the hats who are outside the working group that we bring in, right? So vendor is one of the hats I wear. I used to wear consultant hat. I used to wear platform engineer hat. I used to, so like I can take in some of those things, and we all have that. Where current role, previous role, etc. And I think our job as a working group is to make sure that we have people in all of these categories, and specifically these three, reviewing this on the regular, because that's where we're going to get the real, like, the feedback,
Okay.
right? So
Okay, I'm good then.
cool. Sorry, I something,
It's good.
nothing like a Tuesday afternoon for, in England at least, to have a philosophical where do you fit in the universe, kind of conversation. Cool. All right, so with that in mind, how do we feel? We can just start maybe going through these. Does anyone have any feedback on them? And yeah, Corbin, I don't know if it's possible. Oh, are those are accepted now? Awesome. We're good. Just kidding. Cool. So yeah, going through the questions. Is there any feedback on that first one? I see a comment in here. To understand organizations.
So I guess one of the points I was making earlier is that looking at the questions individually, to me, isn't valuable until we know how they will be graded, so to speak, right? Because if we're going to say that people go through the section and then look at a rubric, and then they'll know what level of investment they're at, right? And the questions kind of need to map to characteristics, like how do we define that, right? And if we're defining it differently in the survey than in the document, then that doesn't. I don't think that's necessarily helpful, because it feels like maybe we pulled something out of the air in order to come up with the survey, and maybe it means the document needs to be extended, right? So that, and maybe eventually this is the feedback into the document again.
I have a thought on that. So looking at the questions, they kind of, each answer that you could give really maps to one of the boxes on the maturity matrix. So, for example, for the first question, if you select B, a single team that's composed mainly of engineers with similar skill sets, that's going to map you directly onto one of the squares on that matrix. So it's almost like each answer you give adds 1 point to that square. And if you imagine at the end of the assessment, some of the squares will be hot because you've picked them a lot, and other squares will be cooler because you haven't picked them very much. So it kind of gives you, like, you'd have a score per
It's just a sum.
matrix
It's
box.
just a sum of 1
Yeah,
through 4.
I don't
because
think
it's 4 levels.
we may
you
decide to
sum
make
them.
it way more complex later, but
Yeah.
it definitely, like, whenever I've tried to create complex scorings, they always tend to give you the same answer as if you just put a tick for each thing and just then count them at the end.
And this is where I think there are questions that could fall into more than one categories. You may find yourself giving like a half a tick towards like adoption and a half a tick or a whole tick even towards investment or whatever for a question. So you could say like questions have
Or just
influence
duplicate
over
the
more than one.
questions.
So
I've seen a survey or two that just had the same thing in multiple sections.
we're trying to keep
And-
our question count down, David, down. But yes, no, I mean, there's different techniques. I think that's where also like rewording this stuff, if we're going to do a tick in a box per, like, this one is yeah, as you say, the first one is like quite on the nose. And then the question is like, can we do it less on the nose to like better evaluate, like possibly even have a question where like none of the above is one of the questions, and what we're trying to evaluate is, do we think you fall into either 3 or 4, or do we think you or not? And something like that, which can help us like help people like not game the system, essentially, or unintentionally or intentionally, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's
It's to help them be honest with themselves.
exactly with themselves, exactly. I don't know, Corbin, you popped in late. Blake, you came in. Like, either of you have any
Yeah, I
thoughts on
mean,
what you've been hearing so far?
just a couple things. So, as people review the questions, right? I think part of this exercise was, what does it look like if we move away from the simple yes, no question format, right? And if you look at it, like the answers are quite a bit longer. And if we, and you know, I think sometimes in the longer answers, like you can say, that's partially true. Like there's parts of it that I don't necessarily agree with, right? But it's the closest thing that I have potentially, right? So I think we need to be sort of mindful of like those situations. And I think, so two things I would ask. So one is, it's going to take longer because there's a little bit more deliberation needed, right? Because I really need to like now read more and think more a little bit. It's a little bit more less just impulsive yes or no, right? So evaluate that a little bit. And then the second is, can we streamline the answers a little bit so it is a little bit, you know, it's more abbreviated, right? And I think there's a little bit of feedback on that so far, but it would be great to kind of get that a little bit more succinct and a little bit more streamlined, just easier for people to consume. I think it's a little bit hard to consume, I feel, at the moment.
Yeah, we can kind of work on a copy edit to make it concise, I think. But I think that's probably something to do once we agree that if everyone's like, yes, these are the right questions, then we can kind of spend time tightening up the word count, because we might be able to make it so that the question itself is very short, so that then you don't mind spending a tiny bit longer reading each of the answers.
I like the concept of right. I think I said this before. I think this is much more. This is as much an art as it is in science, and I think we can make the questions, whether they're yes, no, whether they're simple questions, simple answers, you know, however the format. I think there's going to need to be room for whoever's, you know, giving the assessment to be able to take comments and know a little bit more about the detail to then actually say, where does it fit in this box? And I think making the questions as simple as possible. I like the yes or no format personally, just because I think that makes the question super simple. And then it still allows, you know, if you say, okay, do you have any other comments? Then the comments can come in and maybe give a little bit more context to just whether it's yes or no, or if you have the simple multiple choice, you know, allowing room for commentary and then adding that into whoever's giving the assessment, that room to be able to say, well, given this feedback, technically this would be, let's say, a 3, but now I'm going to put it at a 4 because of the commentary, you know, put in, or this really should be a 3, but I'm going to get it to a 2, and for this reason. So I think there will always be some room of like, this answer doesn't quite fit, and I need to give a little bit more context to the situation. And I think as long as we give room to the person giving the assessment to make those determinations, then I think that's really the key. But I
That's
think
a really interesting perspective around like the person giving the assessment. Like, this is a question I'd love, like, because you've been through this assessment in working with a trusted advisor person, like helping you through it. Like, but I definitely have seen your work. You are a senior contributor. You know what's going on around the space. Would you ever see yourself wanting to apply this independently within an organization, you or your peers, right? Like, someone in your team, someone in your department, someone in your org, or like a peer at another org, picking this assessment up and wanting to do it without having an assessor versus like self doing.
when I say an assessor, I just mean the person giving the assessment, right? Obviously, that person I think has to have certain qualities, right? They obviously need to know the platform maturity model. They need to understand those sorts of things. But I don't think it has to be like, for example, somebody from the working group or somebody from a specific organization or a consultant or whatever, right? Like, for example, I think I could, you know, I think if, you know, Abby, you gave me the assessment, I think I could get to a very similar result as to if I gave myself the own assessment for my organization. Um, so I think anybody can do it, assuming they have that pretextual knowledge of like, what is the platform maturity model? You know, what are the standards? What, you know, how do you, and then generally maybe you know, if there was maybe like how do you give this assessment and evaluate the questions to this assessment, which I think we're already going to need anyways, some sort of guide around that I think really those are the key things when you're giving the assessment that I think you need.
think that's super interesting on like, do you have to know the model to be able to take this assessment? William, you go up next.
Yeah, Blake, I like Abby, I know I know about your work as well. I have one concern though. The statement of the uh, platform engineering maturity model was that, and of course, Abby, with all due respect, it sounds very American. It should not be weaponized, but having an assessor that runs the assessment, if I feel it's going to lead to vendors using this. I would rather have. I'm not envisioning very well the deliverable, how it's going to picture. I'm trying to look at the question. I love a lot what Corbin said. I really like what you said as well, Blake. But I also like I begin to like a little bit the format, because it stimulates what the maturity model does, which is thinking about where you are and where you're not. Even through reading the questions, I like that what's triggering. I know they are verbose. I know there is a lot in the questions, but it should be something that is a self-service type of thing. The assessment tool and the maturity model. If we are going to need somebody that knows already or has a seniority level into this type of things, we are going to have a tool that is best used in the hands of somebody that can run it. And that can be a consultant in the platform engineering maturity or something like that. So I'm just worried about that. I'm not saying that, I'm just worried that type of thinking can lead to something like that.
And being senior in your org versus being senior in the content of the maturity model are two different levels of seniority, which you could have one
Correct.
or both or neither.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
who are we targeting? Lena.
I think my response is probably quite similar to William. I would see this, and I think I would quite like to still see this questionnaire as something that's accessible to engineers within teams. And I would expect to use it and then use the outcome as something that I would take to my team and say, look, this is where we are, these are the opportunities. And I think that the platform maturity model is actually accessible enough. I don't know if it needs an extra layer of expertise to administer the test. And perhaps I'm kind of misunderstanding what you were saying, Blake, but I think
Yeah, maybe to give just a little bit more context, I'm not saying that it can't be self-service, right? I definitely think there's a part of it that should be self-service, but I'll also maybe make the argument that is it more valuable for somebody internally to give this assessment and you go to a VP or go to some senior leader and say, hey, right, this is where our platform initiative is. I guess my thought is if I get an external source, whether it's a consultant, a vendor, whoever, to give that assessment and give that to my senior leadership team and for somebody independent outside of my org, to give that, I think it's much more impactful for me in an individual contributor role to go be able to do that and say, look, somebody outside of my org that has no affiliation and has no stake in the game, right, is telling us that these are the problems we have. And we can either do something about it and great, well, whatever, or we won't, and these are the risks we're taking, right? I think that's where I see a lot of the value, but I definitely think that some of this should be self-service. I guess my thought is I think you should have some level of understanding if you're giving this assessment or you're trying to do this assessment on how do you score yourself on the questionnaire, right? Like how do you score it and then how do you take that score and translate it into something on the maturity model? And I still think you can do that self-service. Obviously, I think it still requires some level of knowledge as to like what is the maturity model and then what are the things on the maturity model.
Is that not one of the end goals of the questionnaire, though, is to actually have some sort of presentation, present the scores in a way, I think, as you were mentioning, Steve, in terms of the hotspot over the platform maturity grid. And you get like a kind of an overview of where you actually are or where the majority of your answers imply that you sit. And that could well be a straddling of two columns.
I think this is so I've written these as questions, and I think these are things that we can try and confirm, right? Like that was my understanding of conversations to date as well. Is that like the idea is to have a score. Now, having knowledge of the maturity model might allow you to give nuance to the score at the end and whatever, but like it shouldn't require my perception is if it requires knowledge of the maturity model to run this thing, we probably don't want to do this project as a working group. Just being completely upfront and frank about it. The maturity model was meant to be self-service as it was, and shouldn't particularly need an assessment over the top, but we've heard from people that it does, like that people are like, there's a lot of words there. I don't know where I am. Blah. And so we're trying to fill that gap, right? But if the gap is you have to have read all of those words to understand them to get a score out, or to like give yourself a foothold, then we're probably approaching the wrong solution for the gap that we're hearing about in the market, which is people going, thanks for the model, but where am I? Like, I don't know where to go. And so, but that's my perception from like as a lead and hearing about it, like KubeCons and things of like what people are asking for next. Like, people can definitely share if they're hearing other asks right around.
I think I say just think this I see that David, Stefan, and Steve are in line, and they probably hate me right now. They I just maybe we are putting in front too much parachutes, too much cushions for the fall. I think let's just do it. Let's just build it, and let's just ship it. But maybe the users go beyond what we are even thinking right now. I think the questions are very clear. It's plain English. It's just yes, Steve. I agree. I agree. The questions are very clear. They are very clear on what is the question and what is the understanding of the question. Answering yes or no, or answering I think this is true, or like is there a budget allocated for this? An engineer can answer, a product owner can answer, and a team lead can answer. Let them just answer, and then maybe they will come up with something else, and they say, okay, this is not what I'm expecting. Now, David, Steve,
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah, I think like
Who was? Go ahead.
the approach I would probably go by would like throw it at like my previous job. It was like managers, directors, and everything, and I was sort of like in between all of them and the different engineering teams. I would probably use this as a conversation start of where the hell are we and where should we go. So I would ask everyone in that group to go through this one, figure it out, and we'll go topic by topic and have the discussions to figure out like where are we totally disconnected in our understanding. Like I would definitely use it for that. But from the outside, if you've read like 2 articles on platform engineering and you end up with this one, you could definitely go for the like, where the hell am I? And you just want to speed run it with yes no questions and get a number out. But is it the conversation starter? Is it the factual version with just a number we want? I think that it keeps splitting my mind every time I hear somebody else pitch something on it.
David?
I didn't see who was. I think I came after Steve.
I think I have it in order. I think you sort of get ordered from left to right and down. So I think you're up, David.
Oh, so one of there's a lot of discussion about the survey, and I'll go back to outcomes, and maybe the idea of self-service and survey are a little, I wouldn't say they're contradictory, but the common way to present someone with an overall concept or a theory is to then give them a workbook, right? There's a lot of like books that get published that way, right? There's the Phoenix Project and then the DevOps handbook or workbook, the SRE, like, so maybe one of the ways to look at this, and I was thinking while we were talking about, like, you almost look at it as a coloring sheet, like just give them the grid and say, fill in this part of the grid or which level you're at. These are the things you need to answer for yourself and kind of plug it in that way. I think that makes it, if you give people a worksheet type approach to things, that's very easy to do internally, either individually or in like group settings, right? And you want to make something, if it's going to be a discussion piece, a website that collects data or, you know, something like that is not as accessible in terms of like fostering, you know, collaboration on an internal basis, like, you know, compared to say worksheet orient, like PDFs even, right? That people can go through. So maybe, you know, again, I'm I'm trying to see like how would someone approach this? How would they use it from an internal perspective? And it's very compatible with using an outside consultant because an outside consultant can run the same kind of exercise using the worksheets and simply be there to guide the people when they have questions about, well, what about this gray
What does
area,
this actually
right?
mean? And yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're saying that worksheet, like just so I know I can understand, is like, are you imagining sort of this table that we have with like like questions within it that
It's a
go
bit
like, you know, does this
reformatted.
it's just a
It's a bit of
reformatting because like we've already have like we did this is the thing. This is why like
you
I
don't have a
question
good
about
you don't
that. Like
necessarily have a one to one. It isn't quite one to one because your characteristics are not um they're not consistent across each level, right?
okay.
And so that might be one of the things that people find a little unclear. Like usually when you have like say a job hierarchy, right? You have like this plus that, right?
Mm.
You're doing all these things and now you have these additional. And maybe that is somewhat implied in here, but it might need to be made a bit more clear. But maybe if you just line up some of the content in here and have a way to pivot it so that people can approach it by, oh, you're going to do this worksheet and you're going to have to reference the actual document, which is laid out maybe a little more easily to be compatible with that. That might make self-service. And the questions are just in the document, you know, sort of implied. Maybe the statements become questions and, you know, you kind of have the V2 could just be do this workshop, do this worksheet and you'll figure out what level you're at.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that's like so the point I made was like right now the format, and I'll be honest, my default behavior has been like we are almost pretending the model doesn't exist and you're asking these questions and then it will magically appear as a model
Yeah.
versus you're saying just be clear there's a model and let people like
Yeah.
if people want to game the system to be level 4 they can do it. Like look, this is all self-assessment. If people want to get
Yeah.
value from it they can, and as long as we're giving them the tools to apply, right?
Yeah.
We're not there to babysit or scold people if they're doing something in a way that would be different than us, right? It's are they getting
Yep.
value? So,
Yep.
Steve, what
Yeah,
do you
but
think?
I think just one quick comment on that. I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like if you go through this thing and it says, "Hey, you're in this level," you should be able to go to the document and read that section and go, "Is this me?" Right? Like it should prove itself in some way, right? And I think that's a little bit part of it is like what I was doing before this is asking a bunch of yes no questions and providing this like risk calculation thing, right? And then I looked at that and then I made my own assessment based on the answers and said, "Oh, you know, you actually answered like a lot of these really well, but the ones that you didn't answer actually put you in a lower category." Or you answered a lot of these really well, or you missed a few of these, but you're actually in a higher category. Like it was a lot more gray, right? Now we're trying to go to this place where it's not gray. It's actually pretty transparent. And if you answer these questions a certain way, you're going to be in a 3. And you should be able to go look at 3, level 3 or whatever. You should be able to go to that level and read it and go, okay, I identify with this thing, right? And there may be some gaps in that. And you say, okay, well, maybe there's a few things that I should work on or whatever. Like, I don't know. The intention is that people can very easily or more easily figure out where are they and then figure out what are the things that I should go work on, right? If I wanted to make some improvements or get more investment or whatever it is, um, you know, it should help feed that and then keep going.
There's a world
I
where
think
this is
that
pointing towards something far more lightweight, right? Um, between David's suggestion and what you're saying there, Corbin. Go on,
I
Doug.
think
Go.
that clarifies also what I was saying of like, I don't know if you have to go into the assessment knowing the maturity model, but you like when you're actually grading the assessment, I think you should be able to look at your answers, look, understand the context of the conversation of the assessment, and then say, okay, here's where I am on this model, right? And be able to look at the model and be like, yeah, okay, I answered these and this makes sense.
So there should be some strong linkage between the questions and how they're feeding into rating, maybe categorically or like categorization or something like that, so that you understand like how you answered and how that relates to the model, right? Because some of the questions in here already, it's because of the way the model is laid out with its categorization, it's not clear necessarily how they map. The first question in there maps very nicely because it's about dedicated team versus not, but others don't. I'm sorry, I
Steve Fenton, I think
maybe
you've had
jumped.
your
I'm
hand up
so
a bit.
working class. I just won't talk. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm terrible with that. I'm like, so I think in terms of what comes first, I think the assessment is going to be the first touch on this whole subject for a lot of people because it's a really easy thing that can get you started. So people will do the assessment and through it, they're going to discover the maturity model. That's how I think most people will do this. The second use case is going to be people who open the maturity model and are overwhelmed, and the assessment's going to make it easier for them. Because the maturity model, you've got this grid of 24 things, then there's 5 tabs underneath with the explanations, and you can then find the piece in those tabs that relates to you. Well, if you do the assessment, we can color in the grid to show you roughly where you are, and we can filter all of that content that goes below it to just show you the ones that you're like, you are provisional investment and you are operational in adoption. But actually you're optimizing in interfaces, which is kind of cool. So you can kind of show them then the explanations for those different things that you've worked out that they're roughly in those zones, with the option for them to still see the parts that you're kind of hiding. And I think Stefan mentioned it, like rather than this being like led by someone on the self-assessment version of this, the idea of the team just sitting down in front of a projector and answering the questions together, that conversation is really going to be super valuable. And if a consultant's involved, the guidance they give and the way that they can help tailor it is going to add like a huge chunk of value. And then the consultant kind of is like, they rip open their shirt with their superhero thing underneath and go, I can help you fix this, right? It's like, so that's how I kind of see that working. And I think like, because it's filtering down all of this really cool information that already exists, just so it's like, here's your tailored version of this maturity model. A little bit like how, I mean, I know psychometric tests are complete like mysticism for business, but you don't read the book of personality types. You answer a questionnaire and it says, oh, you're a whatever shaper if you're doing Belbin or whatever test you're doing. It says you're one of these, and then you read the fact sheet just for that type, and you're like, oh, I understand myself perfectly now, and I don't have a problem living in this world. So yeah,
True story. I sent one of those to my mom once, and she was like, "That's a great review." I'm like, "No, mom, this was no. Oh God." Go on, William.
Yes, so the conversation from when I raised the hand to now evolved very much where I was going. I would like to add one more outcome to what Steve said. Those two are absolutely true. There is also a third one, I think. So the you know those surveys that are sent out in the large organization company wide to have like a sentiment understanding of how the the rest of the company perceives the situation. That could also be this. Thinking about it, I mean, executives might have, or executives or non-executives, but still top stakeholders might have an understanding of what the platform initiative is. There is hype, There is a lot of things, and they have an understanding and feeling of where they are, and individual assessments, like let's say myself and Abby work together in the same organization, but we have a different sentiment of what we understand where we understand our platform initiative is, or we have a different feeling. All those results can be brought to a wider team and to executive to say, well, you know what, I thought we were here, but I see that 90% of my platform engineers and developers are saying, no, we are here. So what is going to cost us to take us there in those aspects of the maturity? So the assessment, I think, is decoupled in use. Is decoupled from the model, but the model is definitely linked to the assessment, as in this explanation, and they can be used together or not together. So yeah, I think there are benefits in not having it strictly associated to each other, as in linked, but they are naturally associated, of course. The outcome should be something that can be read and understood in the maturity model.
Nice. That'll be something we have to progress on, how tightly those are linked versus, yeah.
Yeah.
Lena, last couple minutes.
But yeah, I was actually just gonna second what Steve was saying, because effectively what you described is what I've done for our team. So I've effectively reproduced the matrix, abstracted it out from the platform maturity model, and just copied across the bits that are relevant. Kind of it. So not just, I guess, the sections that we fall into, but then a little bit of the ones either side, because it's never fully one. So we've got a little bit, we kind of overspill, I suppose, into one or the other. But absolutely, I think if there'd been a questionnaire tool that would have saved me perhaps navigating through the maturity model, which I do think is accessible, but I think it's a little bit unwieldy, I would have absolutely done that. And if it had produced what I had to painstakingly reproduce in Confluence, that'd be great. But
You need both, though, right? And I think, like, from my perspective, what I've done is ask people to familiarize themselves with the white paper and the maturity model prior to going into this exercise. They need context, some context. Like, they don't need to understand everything, but they need to have some context, because then when I show the results, I can say, okay, this is where you are, right? They can go back and use that as reference material, right? And go back and like read it and figure out, okay, well, what does it look like if I'm the next level? What does that look like? Or what are the things that maybe I've already accomplished? Have I really done those things, right? So you can go back and kind of see like the whole spectrum now, but you have a lot more context of kind of where you are in that place. So I do recommend that people are familiar with those materials, kind of going into it.
I just have one quick thing and then I'll lower my hand. The only thing I was going to just say is one of the things that I think I talked about when we were originally doing the maturity model that I think we just want to have, and this is completely off topic of the previous conversation, but it was just on my head, is not tying this specifically to cloud platforms, internal developer platforms. Because when we first had the draft of the maturity model, there was a lot of like, there was a lot of like nuances of like, we're really focusing cloud platforms or internal developer platforms. And my organization, there's variety of platforms for things that are, software related to the things that we do. And so just ensuring that we're not tying questions to just specifically internal developer platforms, I think is really, really key. If you're a retailer, a credit payment processing platform, right? To centralize all your credit processing, like would be a great way to assess your platform. So just ensuring that a lot of our questions are not tied to, well, we're focusing internal developer platforms or cloud platforms.
Yep. I think that helped with
Is
the
that a
the
goal?
outcome.
Because if that's a goal, we should write it down. Like the last assessment I did had that scenario where they started talking about database platforms and things like that. And I didn't, there were some parts that were closely related, there were other parts where we're like way off, right? And so personally, like I kept bringing them back to, this is related to the CNCF ecosystem and like those projects, right? And therefore an internal developer platform, like I had to keep kind of bringing us back to, hey, that's what we're talking about here. If it's not that, or if that's not the goal, or if the goal is something broader, then I think we have to be pretty clear about that, and we might have to make some adjustments accordingly. For my purposes, like I would like to keep the scopes as narrow as possible and try to get something out, right? And I think we spent the last hour kind of talking about, like, is this a good idea? How does this work? You know, those kind of things. But I think as you guys go away from this call, we need some practical like feedback on, are these the right questions? Does this make sense? What do we need to do next? And I think one of the things I heard was making sure that I'm going to take this in this Word document format and put it in a table so that you can see, like, if you answer this question this way, it maps you to this level, and we can kind of go through this exercise of like, I'm going to answer all these questions. I'm going to end up here. If I answer the questions this way, I'm going to end up here. Are there overlap? Are there things that cause confusion? Like, is it going to work? Like, I don't know. So maybe that's like the next step, but looking for some feedback along those lines.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think just to
I
be
agree with
perfectly
that as-
frank from the like working group like process, is the project is still really early days on whether or not it's going to get published. Like there are a lot of things that we're talking about that could say this doesn't make sense right now, right? Like there's been a lot of conversations that possibly push on the white paper needing a V2. Like if you read that white paper, you can tell it's from 18 months, like 2 years ago. Like it is from 2 years ago. And like there's been a lot of learning since then. And like some of the conversations Blake's raising around like, is it IDP or is it bigger? Like if we're building on a shaky foundation, that's not great. It's like situation to be in, as well as like, the making sure that we're getting kind of like something that the ecosystem around the working group, the users that follow the working group would get value from. Like, so I want there to be an assessment. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. Like, I'm definitely keen to see it, but like, I just think one of the things we have to be aware of is like, sometimes we identify that like, there are things that there are not enough building blocks in place to make it successful yet, and we just have to keep an eye out for those and build those building blocks successfully when we need to. Like I wanted the maturity model from before the white paper, but there's no way that was going to succeed without a white paper declaring what was good, right? And so those are all like the building blocks. So but Lena, I think you've had your hand raised for a bit there. You're okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I have a next step around moving the questions to a table so we can actually like look at the mappings. Is there any other next steps that people want, since we're a few minutes over at this stage?
I agree with that action. I think it'd be really useful to show how the answers map onto the model. We can also use that to do the reverse, which is to see if we have any places on that model that maybe we're not asking a question about. It will just cover that as well. So we could do a gap analysis using that. So I think that's probably the key next step.
Cool. Yeah, and I think that would be good. I think this document has become, I realize these are still all comments, and so this document's become a bit unwieldy. And so like I think taking these and grabbing them into a spot where we can do that. Putting them into a table does have its pros and cons, because tables have a hard time with comments. But we can see how we get to, and only, we can evaluate the format as and when we need to. But I think that is definitely the next format that will help provide us feedback. So cool.
Can we use Google Sheets for that?
Yes.
Cool.
So I've got just like a bunch of docs. So Corbin, you're welcome to start the Google Sheet, or I can start the Google Sheet. Just adding, if you can, me to editor would be helpful from early days. But other than that, it'd be good. Let me know if you need me to help create it.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'll just hit you up offline. All right,
Perfect.
thanks everybody. I gotta run.
Adios, y'all.
All right, see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.